Now to tonight's special report, looking at the shocking rate of suicide among Indigenous youth and why so little progress is being made despite a decade of reviews and recommendations. Young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are 5 times more likely to take their own lives than other Australian youth. Last week, a major inquest into a spate of suicides in the Kimberley was handed down. It found little had been done to address domestic violence and alcohol abuse or to improve poor living conditions. Our Indigenous Affairs correspondent Isabella Higgins travelled to WA, where many communities are struggling to find solutions. A warning for Indigenous viewers, this story contains images of people who have died.
Linda Cocky was just 16 when she ended her life. Her death left Mother Grace devastated. Linda never had the chance to meet her youngest sibling, baby Carmel.
Very difficult because when she left, she took a big part of me with her.
In the family home, the memories are everywhere.
My photo is Sonny that's the best one I like because she is an angel out there now. Yeah. Looking over her family, especially her younger sisters and brothers.
Almost a year on, Grace Cocky is still looking for answers. Linda had no diagnosed mental illness and there were no obvious signs of suicidal thoughts. But she had a challenging childhood. She was drinking in the hours before her death.
She went to 4 high schools. That's how much she loved school. She didn't want to, even though we moved around, because I had a house for 9 years and getting kicked out for domestic violence.
Give me a call whenever you want.
You might bring wicked support, so yeah.
Megan Krakau supported the family through the darkest days. She's part of the National Indigenous Critical Response Service and meets many grieving relatives struggling to understand how someone could end their life.
To make sure I'm watching.
Megan is often the first person called in to help after an Indigenous suicide in this area. She's troubled by how many lives have been lost in these suburban streets of Perth.
In the community at large, people are saying, who next? Now that is really quite sad when you have a person thinking that the best option and the only option is to take their life and end the pain.
At the headquarters of the National Indigenous Critical Response Service, they're noticing a disturbing trend.
We're actually seeing now the numbers of completed suicides of young women in our communities on the increase. The biggest challenge we have is reversing the idea of suicide being normal.
The recent spate of deaths by suicide, mostly teenage girls, saw Indigenous Health Minister Ken Wyatt holding crisis meetings.
I'd call it a tragedy. We've got to ask questions as to why did that hope and zest for life dissipate.
In the past decade, there's been a number of major inquiries that have looked into the causes of the shockingly high Indigenous suicide rate. The latest was handed down here in Perth last week. The findings were strikingly similar to past reports, finding that crushing intergenerational trauma and poverty were to blame.
Making sure that that's not yet another report that sits on the shelf. They're not just our kids, they're our nation's kids, and something needs to be done.
Ken Wyatt says more money is not the solution. He wants big organisations to provide better care outside of normal business hours.
Suicide doesn't happen between 9 and 5. I feel frustrated there are organisations who are funded on many levels, who are resourced. And yet, when we tackle some of these matters, the first thing that's raised is we need additional money.
Frontline workers like Megan say suicides won't stop until more is done to address disadvantage.
With having those pressures.
During home visits, she often finds families struggling to get by and losing hope.
What's going on with your food situation?
Barely got none. I've barely got none.
During this outreach trip, she meets 3 young women, all touched by suicide.
I lost my partner.
Same, my daughter's dad and her uncle as well, and a few others.
Yeah, I lost my best friend, very close cousins, uncles and aunties.
How does it affect your families and your community?
I don't think there is even a word that can even describe the pain that you go through when you experience something like that.
Megan's work for today isn't done. She heads off to support another grieving family.
And we go and visit him every Sunday and we take flowers.
Sharon Hume laid her son to rest just a few months ago. And with so much loss in the community, she worries for her young grandchildren.
I miss my son so much. For not only myself, the family and my grandchildren have to be there for them.
Change may be too late for this family, but they hope it'll arrive for the next generation.
You say your prayer for Dad?
Isabella Higgins, ABC News, Perth.
And if you or someone you know needs help, please contact Beyond Blue by phone or their website. Or if you're experiencing distress, contact Lifeline on 13 11 14.